By sunrise, you will no longer be my son. Richard Hayes said it without raising his voice, which somehow made the words colder than the snow gathering beyond the tall windows. Elliot stood in the center of the family study with his hands clasped behind his back, because if he let them hang at his sides, everyone would see them shake. On the desk lay the papers that erased him from the Hayes family. His allowance, his inheritance, his name in the household registry, every thin official page arranged with the neatness of a dinner setting. His father had always preferred cruelty when it looked respectable. All because I refused to marry a man I've never met. Elliot asked. Richard's expression barely changed. Because you refused to do the one useful thing ever asked of you. There it was. Useful. Elliot had spent 23 years trying to become that word. He had studied until dawn, smiled through insults at formal dinners, and apologized for taking up space in rooms where he had been born. Still, he had never been clever enough, strong enough, profitable enough. His older brothers had titles waiting for them. Elliot had an old silver ring from his mother and a talent for disappointing his father. Richard slid the final document across the desk. Sign it. Elliot looked toward the doorway. Servants stood silently in the hall, pretending not to listen. No one stepped forward. No one ever did. He picked up the pen. For one foolish second, he imagined his father stopping him. Perhaps Richard would sigh, soften, and admit this had all been a test. Perhaps he would say Elliot's mother would have wanted them to remain a family. Instead, Richard tapped one finger against the desk. Impatient, Elliot signed. The scratch of ink sounded louder than it should have. Less than 20 minutes later, he stood outside the iron gates with a single suitcase, $8 in his coat pocket, and snow melting into his hair. The front doors closed behind him. Not slammed. That would have required emotion. They simply shut, quiet and final. Elliot stared at the house where he had grown up and waited for grief to arrive. What came instead was a strange, breathless emptiness. Well, he whispered, tightening his grip on the suitcase handle. At least I don't have to attend breakfast. His laugh disappeared into the winter air. The nearest town was nearly 4 miles away, and his shoes had been designed for polished floors, not frozen roads. He made it half a mile before the cold worked through his gloves. By the time he reached the stone bridge, his legs felt heavy and the world had become nothing but white sky, white fields, and the dark ribbon of road beneath his feet. Then came the sound of horses. Elliot stepped aside as a black carriage approached, its doors marked with a golden sun, the imperial seal of Aurelia. The carriage stopped directly beside him. His stomach dropped. The door opened, and a tall man in a black coat stepped down into the snow. He had dark hair touched with silver at one temple, sharp blue-gray eyes, and the kind of stillness that made the entire road seem to wait for him. Elliot recognized him instantly. Everyone did. Emperor Adrian Blackwood. The richest, most powerful man in the empire looked at Elliot's worn suitcase, then at the snow collecting on his shoulders. Without a word, Adrian removed his coat and placed it around him. Warmth settled over Elliot, carrying the faint scent of cedar and winter rain. Your Majesty, Elliot managed, attempting to kneel. Adrian caught his arm before he could. His touch was steady, careful, and gone almost immediately. Stand, the Emperor said. No one kneels in the snow before me. Elliot swallowed. Why are you here? Adrian's gaze shifted toward the distant Hayes estate, where not a single light had appeared in the windows. When he looked back, something unreadable moved behind his eyes. Because they abandoned the wrong man. Elliot's heart stumbled. Adrian opened the carriage door and held out his hand. Come with me, Elliot. Where? Adrian's expression softened by the smallest degree. Home, he said. Then, as if the night had not already become impossible, he added, my future husband should not be left alone in the cold. For several seconds, Elliot forgot how doors worked. He stared at Adrian's outstretched hand as snow gathered along the Emperor's dark sleeve. Future husband. The words had landed somewhere between impossible and completely unreasonable, which was becoming a crowded neighborhood in Elliot's mind. I think you have the wrong Elliot, he said. There are probably hundreds of us. Very common name. Elliot Hayes, Adrian replied. 23 years old. Youngest son of Richard Hayes. Educated in history, trade law, and diplomacy. Fond of lemon tea. Terrible at pretending he is not cold. Elliot glanced at the coat wrapped around him. That last fact was recently discovered. The others were not. Adrian kept his hand extended, but he did not move closer. The choice remained between them. Behind Elliot stood a house that had erased him. Before him waited the most powerful man in Aurelia, and a carriage warm enough to make poor decisions seem reasonable. Elliot placed his hand in Adrian's. The Emperor helped him inside, then released him immediately. The carriage smelled of polished wood and cedar. A small brass heater glowed beneath the opposite seat, and a folded blanket waited beside a tray of tea. Elliot looked at it suspiciously. "Did you know I would be outside?" Adrian sat across from him. "I knew your father intended to dismiss you tonight, and you did not warn me. Would you have believed a royal letter claiming your family planned to abandon you?" Elliot opened his mouth, then closed it. Annoyingly, the Emperor had a point. Adrian poured tea into a porcelain cup and placed it within Elliot's reach. "Lemon. Of course it was lemon. Why do you know so much about me?" Elliot asked. "Because 3 months ago, Richard Hayes submitted your name for an imperial marriage contract." The warmth in the carriage seemed to vanish. Elliot stared at him. "My father tried to marry me to you? He offered you as part of a financial agreement." Adrian's voice remained calm, but his jaw tightened. "Your family owes money to several powerful houses. Your father believed a connection to the crown would protect the Hayes estate." Elliot laughed once, without humor. "So he finally found a use for me." "He found a price," Adrian corrected. "That is not the same thing." The words struck deeper than Elliot expected. He looked down at the old silver ring on his finger. "Then why accept?" Adrian reached into his coat and produced a sealed folder. Inside were copies of 3 agreements bearing Richard's signature. Each promised Elliot's hand to a different noble family. One name belonged to the man Elliot had refused that morning. "These cannot all be legal," Elliot whispered. "They are not. But powerful men often confuse influence with permission." Adrian leaned back. "Once I accepted the imperial contract, every private agreement became void. Your father attempted to cancel ours after realizing he would lose control over your inheritance." Elliot looked up sharply. "What inheritance?" "That is a longer conversation. I appear to have time." Outside, the carriage rolled through the palace gates. Golden lights spread across white stone towers, bright enough to turn the falling snow into sparks. Elliot pressed closer to the window, despite himself. Adrian watched him quietly. "I will not force you to marry me," he said. Elliot turned. "You called me your future husband. I was being optimistic." That almost sounded like humor. Almost. Adrian placed a second document on the table. "You have 3 choices. You may refuse and leave with enough money to begin again. You may accept a marriage in name only for 1 year, with complete freedom afterward. Or you may enter a true marriage, but only by your own decision." Elliot studied his face, searching for the trap. "And what do you gain?" "An ally the court cannot predict. You do not know me. I know you refuse to be sold, even when refusal cost you everything." Adrian's gaze held his. "That tells me enough to begin." The carriage stopped beneath the palace entrance. Adrian opened the door, but did not step out. "You do not need to answer tonight." Elliot looked at the illuminated palace, then back at the road disappearing into darkness. 1 year, he said. "A marriage in name only. I keep my freedom, my privacy, and the right to leave." Adrian offered his hand again. "Agreed." Elliot took it. The instant his silver ring touched Adrian's signet, warm golden light flashed between their fingers. Somewhere inside the palace, every bell began to ring. The palace bells did not ring politely. They thundered through the night as if the entire empire had just been informed that Elliot Hayes had touched the wrong piece of jewelry. He pulled his hand back, but the golden light remained, circling the silver ring his mother had left him before fading beneath his skin. "Please tell me that happens often," Elliot said. Adrian looked toward the palace doors, where servants had begun gathering in startled silence. "It has never happened." "Wonderful. I was worried tonight might become normal." A man in a navy uniform hurried down the steps. He was broad-shouldered, sandy-haired, and wearing the expression of someone who had just lost an argument with destiny. "Your Majesty," he said, glancing between Adrian and Elliot. The imperial wards recognized a royal bond. Adrian's face became unreadable. "Marcus Vale, my chief advisor." "Marcus, this is Elliot Hayes." Marcus studied Elliot for one long second. "The Elliot Hayes?" "Apparently," Elliot said, although nobody has explained what that means. Marcus opened his mouth, but Adrian gave him a look. He immediately smiled instead. It means welcome to the palace. Please try not to activate anything else before breakfast. Inside, white marble floors reflected hundreds of candle flames. Gold-trimmed arches stretched overhead, and portraits of former emperors watched Elliot pass with expressions ranging from disapproval to what looked like personal offense. His damp shoes squeaked with every step. He had never felt more visible. By morning, the court had already learned of the engagement. Elliot stood in a dressing room while 3 attendants adjusted a dark green coat that fit him too perfectly to be accidental. His Majesty ordered several sizes prepared, one attendant explained. Elliot stared at his reflection. He planned this thoroughly for an optimistic man. The official announcement took place in the Sun Hall before nearly 200 nobles. Conversation stopped when Elliot entered beside Adrian. Some faces showed curiosity. Others showed amusement. A silver-haired duke near the front did not bother lowering his voice. So that is the discarded Hayes boy. The emperor must be feeling charitable. Elliot kept walking. He had learned young that silence could survive almost anything. Then Adrian stopped. The room went still. Duke Caro, Adrian said calmly, repeat what you said. The duke paled. Your Majesty, it was merely an observation. Then observe more carefully. Adrian's voice remained even. A man abandoned by his family still possesses dignity. A father who abandons his son does not. Every eye turned toward Elliot. Heat climbed his face, but Adrian did not speak for him again. He simply waited. Elliot understood. This was not rescue. It was room. He faced the duke. You may call me discarded when you have survived being thrown away, he said. Until then, you may call me Elliot. Marcus coughed into his hand, suspiciously hiding a smile. The duke bowed and apologized before the entire court. Later, beyond the closed doors of a quiet sitting room, Elliot finally released the breath he had been holding. You embarrassed him. Adrian poured 2 cups of lemon tea. He embarrassed himself. I provided an audience. Elliot accepted the cup. Their fingers nearly touched, but Adrian paused first, allowing Elliot to decide the distance. Why did you defend me? Elliot asked. Adrian met his eyes. Because today, you needed someone beside you. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, perhaps you will not. Adrian reached toward Elliot's wrist, stopped, and waited. Elliot gave a small nod. With one careful motion, Adrian wiped away a drop of tea resting near his cuff, then stepped back. I will stand there until you no longer need me, he said. Elliot looked down at the silver ring, now glowing faintly beneath the morning light. For the first time since leaving the Hayes estate, the palace did not feel like another place where he had been sent. It felt like somewhere he had entered by choice. 3 weeks into palace life, Elliot discovered that Emperor Adrian Blackwood had 2 completely different reputations. According to the court, Adrian was a human winter storm who could silence a council chamber with one glance. According to the kitchen staff, he was the man who remembered that the youngest dishwasher was studying for a civil service examination and quietly arranged extra time for him to prepare. Elliot found that contradiction deeply inconvenient. It was much easier to distrust a cold emperor than a man who carried sugar cubes in his pocket for an aging palace horse. Elliot learned about the horse by accident one pale morning when he escaped another exhausting lesson in ceremonial greetings. Marcus had insisted there were 17 correct ways to bow, depending on rank, occasion, and whether someone had recently inherited a vineyard. Elliot had reached the stables before Marcus could introduce an 18th. There, beneath the warm wooden rafters, Adrian stood beside an old gray mare named Willow, brushing her coat with slow, careful strokes. He wore no crown, no medals, and no expression designed to frighten diplomats. She does not trust strangers, Adrian said when he noticed Elliot. Willow immediately leaned toward Elliot and searched his coat for treats. Adrian looked mildly betrayed. Apparently, she does not trust specific strangers. Elliot laughed before he could stop himself. Adrian stared at him for a second, as if the sound had surprised him, then offered him a sugar cube. Over the following days, Elliot began noticing other details. Adrian knew every guard by name. He sent warm meals to servants working late. He left formal dinners early, but always asked whether Elliot wanted to stay. Most strangely, he never entered Elliot's rooms without permission, even when official documents required an immediate signature. Respect, Elliot realized, could be quieter than affection and somehow more dangerous to a guarded heart. One night, the palace lights went dark. The magical lanterns flickered once, then vanished, leaving the corridors washed in moonlight. Elliot found Adrian alone in the library beside an unlit fireplace. Marcus said the power failure is temporary, Elliot said. I know. Adrian's voice sounded different in the darkness. Tired. Human. Elliot sat in the chair across from him. You dislike the dark? No. Adrian looked toward the tall windows. I dislike silence on this date. It was the anniversary of his mother's death, he explained. She had trusted the wrong people inside the palace, and afterward Adrian had learned to treat every kindness like a hidden negotiation. Everyone wanted something from the crown, he said. No one ever asked whether I wanted to wear it. Elliot looked at the man without the gold, without the court, without 200 people waiting for him to be unbreakable. Did you? Adrian gave a faint smile. No one has asked me that before. I just did. The silence changed. It no longer felt empty. Elliot reached across the narrow space and placed his hand over Adrian's. Adrian went completely still. He did not close his fingers until Elliot gently turned his palm upward, making the invitation clear. Then Adrian held his hand as though it were something entrusted to him, not something he owned. The lanterns slowly returned, filling the library with soft golden light. Adrian lifted his gaze. May I kiss you? Elliot's breath caught. The question was quiet, patient, and more powerful than any command. Adrian leaned closer but stopped before their faces touched, leaving the final inch entirely to Elliot. Elliot almost crossed it. Then every bell in the eastern tower began ringing at once, and Marcus rushed through the library doors holding a sealed letter. Your Majesty, he said, breathless, Richard Hayes is at the palace gates. He says he has come to take his son home. Richard Hayes entered the Sun Hall carrying a wooden box and wearing grief like a carefully tailored coat. Elliot stood beside Adrian at the foot of the throne, his hand still remembering the warmth of the moment the bells had interrupted. His father looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. His silver hair was untidy, his eyes red, his shoulders lowered just enough to suggest regret without sacrificing dignity. Elliot hated how quickly hope moved inside him. It rose before reason could stop it, small and humiliating. Elliot, Richard said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. I have come to bring you home. The word home landed strangely now. It no longer belonged entirely to the estate beyond the frozen fields. Richard approached but stopped several feet away when Adrian shifted beside. Elliot. The Emperor did not reach for him. He did not speak. He simply remained there, solid and silent, leaving Elliot space to decide what happened next. You told me I was no longer your son, Elliot said. I was angry. Richard looked down at the box in his hands. I was afraid. The family accounts were collapsing, and I convinced myself that control was the same as protection. It was not. He opened the box. Inside were dozens of sealed letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Elliot recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. His breath caught. Where did you get those? She left them for you. I should have given them to you years ago. Elliot reached toward the first letter, then stopped. Why did you hide them? Richard closed his eyes. Because they contained the truth about your inheritance. A murmur moved through the watching court. Richard explained that Elliot's mother had transferred her private estate, trade holdings, and voting rights to her youngest son. Elliot was not penniless. He had never been penniless. He had been the legal heir to a fortune large enough to save the Hayes family without any political marriage. You kept me dependent on you, Elliot whispered. I made choices I cannot defend, Richard said. But I can correct them. Come back with me. Claim what belongs to you. Hope flickered again, but this time it brought suspicion with it. Elliot glanced at Adrian. The Emperor's expression revealed nothing. Richard noticed. Ask him why he chose you, he said quietly. Ask him what your mother's ring unlocks beneath this palace. The silver band on Elliot's finger warmed. What are you talking about? An imperial vault sealed generations ago. Only someone from your mother's bloodline can open it. Adrian did not rescue you by accident. He needed you. The room became painfully still. Elliot turned toward the Emperor. Is that true? Adrian held his gaze. The vault exists. Your ring may be connected to it. Elliot felt the floor tilt beneath him. You knew? I knew there was a possibility. Richard gave a bitter laugh. There is your answer. Adrian did not deny it. Instead, he removed a key from his coat, and handed it to Marcus. "Bring the Blackwood records." Minutes later, 3 heavy folders were placed before Elliot. Adrian opened the first one, revealing reports about the vault, the Hayes contracts, and Elliot's inheritance. Nothing had been removed. Nothing had been hidden behind sealed pages. "Read everything," Adrian said. "Take the documents with you." Elliot stared at him. "With me? You should hear the truth from every side." Adrian's voice remained steady, although something wounded passed briefly through his eyes. "You may leave with your father tonight. The gates will remain open if you choose to return." Richard extended his hand. Adrian did not interfere. That freedom hurt more than pressure would have. Elliot gathered his mother's letters against his chest and looked between the man who had abandoned him and the man who refused to hold him captive. Then he placed his hand in Richard's. "I am going back to the estate," Elliot said. Adrian gave a single nod. "I know." As Elliot walked away, he looked back once. Adrian stood beneath the golden throne, surrounded by an empire, and somehow looked entirely alone. The Hayes estate looked exactly as Elliot remembered, which was the first thing that felt wrong. The lamps glowed behind the tall windows. Fresh flowers filled the entrance hall. Even the clock above the staircase ticked with the same patient rhythm, as though the house had not erased him 3 weeks earlier. Richard led him upstairs without mentioning the servants who now bowed too deeply or the family portraits that had suddenly been returned to the walls. Elliot's old bedroom waited with clean sheets, a fire in the fireplace, and every childhood object arranged precisely where it had once belonged. His wooden sailboat rested on the windowsill. His mother's blue reading chair stood beside the bed. Someone had even placed lemon tea on the nightstand. "I remembered," Richard said from the doorway. Elliot touched the sailboat carefully. "You remembered after throwing everything away?" Richard's face tightened. "I was trying to correct my mistake." For one dangerous moment, Elliot wanted to believe him. That was the cruel thing about hope. It did not ask whether a person deserved another chance. It simply arrived and began unpacking. Richard left him alone with the letters. The first was written when Elliot was 6. His mother described his kindness, his curiosity, and the way he once carried an injured bird for nearly a mile because he refused to leave it frightened beside the road. The second letter spoke of the silver ring. The third mentioned a hidden inheritance and a gift that would awaken when Elliot stood beside the rightful ruler of Aurelia. By midnight, Elliot had read 12 letters and understood less than before. He rose to place them inside the desk, then noticed a thin blue ribbon caught behind the wooden panel. The desk had belonged to his mother. Elliot pressed the panel, and a narrow compartment opened. More letters waited inside, along with financial records bearing Richard's signature. Elliot read them once. Then again. The truth formed slowly, each line colder than the last. His mother had left him enough land, investments, and voting rights to make him independent. Richard had concealed everything. He had also received warnings that Elliot's ring could protect the imperial throne from false claims. Adrian had not needed Elliot to open a vault. Richard needed the ring to challenge Adrian's rule. The bedroom door clicked behind him. Richard stood there, no longer looking tired or apologetic. "You were not meant to find those tonight." Elliot gathered the papers against his chest. "You never wanted me home." "Of course I did." Richard's voice was calm again, polished again. "I need your signature, your inheritance, and the ring. Once the court recognizes our claim, everything will return to its proper place." Elliot stared at the room reconstructed from his childhood and finally understood why it felt lifeless. It was not a home. It was a stage built from memories. "You made me believe I was worthless," he said. "You were easier to protect when you believed you needed me." Richard stepped into the hallway and turned the key from the other side. "Rest. Tomorrow you will remember where you belong." Elliot listened to his footsteps fade. Then he looked at the letters, the hidden records, and the silver ring glowing softly on his hand. Fear moved through him, but it no longer controlled the room. He crossed to the window and saw distant golden lights beyond the snowy hills, marking the road toward the palace. Adrian had opened the gates and trusted him to choose. Elliot pressed his palm against the cold glass. "That is what you never understood," he whispered into the silence. "I do not belong to anyone." By morning, Richard had replaced the locked bedroom door with a smile. He entered carrying a formal black coat and spoke as though the night before had been a minor disagreement between reasonable men. "The winter assembly begins in 2 hours," he said. You will stand beside me and tell the court that Adrian concealed the truth about your inheritance." Elliot remained near the window, the letters hidden beneath his shirt and the financial records secured inside his coat. "And if I refuse?" Richard adjusted one silver cuff link. "Then the Hayes name collapses, your brothers lose everything, and the public learns that you abandoned your own family for a crown." There it was again. Family, sharpened into a tool. Elliot had spent years obeying that word. This time, he followed Richard because he had finally decided what he wanted the court to hear. The winter assembly filled the palace courtyard with white banners, golden lanterns, and hundreds of nobles gathered beneath a glass canopy. Snow drifted beyond the walls while musicians played near the marble steps. Elliot stood beside Richard on the raised platform, feeling every gaze settle on the silver ring at his hand. Adrian waited across the courtyard in a dark ceremonial coat. Marcus stood near him, tense but silent. Adrian's eyes found Elliot immediately. He did not rush forward. He did not issue an order. He simply watched, calm enough to make Elliot remember the open palace gates. Richard addressed the court, claiming Adrian had manipulated an abandoned son to gain control of a legendary imperial vault. He produced selected documents, each one arranged to make betrayal look convincing. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Then Richard placed a hand near Elliot's shoulder without touching him. "Tell them," he said quietly. "Choose your family." Elliot looked at Adrian. Some desperate part of him still wanted the Emperor to end this with a command. Adrian had the authority. One sentence could silence everyone. Instead, Adrian stepped away from the throne behind him. "This is Elliot's decision," he said. His voice carried through the courtyard. "Not mine. Not his father's." Richard's smile tightened. "You see? He will not even defend you." Adrian never looked away from Elliot. "I will stand beside him. I will not speak over him." The difference struck Elliot like sunlight through a locked room. Richard had always called control protection. Adrian called freedom a risk worth taking. Elliot faced the crowd. "My father is correct about one thing," he said. "The truth has been hidden." He removed the letters and records from his coat. Richard's face lost its careful calm. Elliot held up the first document, his mother's handwriting visible beneath the imperial seal. "My inheritance was concealed before Emperor Adrian ever knew my name. My father signed marriage agreements using property that legally belonged to me. He brought me back because this ring protects the throne from false claims." Richard reached for the documents, but the silver ring suddenly warmed. Golden light traveled across Elliot's hand and spread over the platform in a quiet circle. The false seals on Richard's papers faded, leaving blank pages beneath them. The genuine records in Elliot's hands remained bright and clear. The entire courtyard fell silent. Elliot stared at the ring. He had expected power to feel heavy. Instead, it felt like a door opening. Richard whispered, "You belong with us." Elliot turned to him. His voice did not shake. "I belonged with you when I was frightened, poor, and useful to blame. You only wanted me back when I became valuable." He stepped away from his father and crossed the platform alone. Adrian waited at the bottom of the stairs, close enough to catch him if he stumbled, far enough to let him descend without help. When Elliot reached the final step, Adrian held out his hand. Elliot looked at it, then at the man who had never once demanded that he take it. This time, Elliot reached first. Elliot's fingers closed around Adrian's hand, and the golden light surrounding the platform softened into a warm glow. For one suspended moment, the entire courtyard seemed to disappear. There was only Adrian's steady grip, the snow drifting beyond the glass canopy, and the quiet certainty that this choice belonged to Elliot alone. Richard's voice broke the silence. "If you walk away from me now, you will have no family left." Elliot turned slowly. The words should have frightened him. Once they would have. Once, he would have apologized simply to stop his father from looking disappointed. Now he saw Marcus standing near the palace steps, openly relieved. He saw the servants who had welcomed him without asking what he could offer them. He saw Adrian, who had given him every opportunity to leave and had never made freedom feel like betrayal. "No," Elliot said. "I will only stop calling the people who hurt me my family." The court remained silent as imperial officials collected the authentic records. Richard's false claims dissolved with the fading magic, and the inheritance documents were placed under royal protection until a public hearing could be held. Adrian did not demand punishment. He looked at Elliot first. "What do you want?" Elliot considered the man who had controlled his life for years. Anger moved through him, but beneath it was something calmer. "I want the truth recorded," he said. "I want the property returned to its rightful owners. I want every agreement made in my name canceled. I do not want revenge." Richard stared at him as if mercy were a language he did not understand. The officials escorted him from the courtyard, not with spectacle, but with the quiet finality of consequences. Only after the last noble departed did Elliot realize how exhausted he was. His knees weakened on the marble steps. Adrian moved forward, then stopped himself. "May I?" Elliot nodded. Adrian caught his arms and guided him to a bench beneath the golden lanterns. His hands were careful, warm, and gone as soon as Elliot was steady. "You could have stopped him sooner," Elliot said. Adrian sat beside him. "I could have stopped his speech." His gaze rested on Elliot's ring. "I could not give you your voice by using mine over it." Elliot looked down at their hands resting inches apart. "I kept waiting for you to rescue me." "I know. And you did not." Adrian's expression tightened with concern. "Are you angry?" Elliot thought of the locked bedroom, the hidden letters, and the moment the ring answered him instead of anyone else. "No," he said. "You trusted me to rescue myself." The tension left Adrian's shoulders. Elliot moved his hand across the bench until their fingers touched. This time, neither of them pulled away. "Earlier," Elliot said, "in the library, you asked me a question." Adrian's eyes softened. "I remember. You never received an answer. You were interrupted." "I am not interrupted now." Adrian turned toward him, but did not move closer. "May I kiss you?" Elliot smiled, small but certain. "Yes." The kiss was gentle and brief, more promise than passion, and when Adrian drew back, his forehead rested lightly against Elliot's. No bells rang. No magic flashed. Nothing changed except everything. A few minutes later, Adrian asked, "Where would you like to go?" Elliot looked through the palace doors, where warm light spilled across the marble floor. "Home," he said. Adrian began to rise, but Elliot kept hold of his hand. "I mean here." The emperor stood completely still. Then his fingers tightened around Elliot's with quiet care. Together, they crossed the courtyard, leaving 2 sets of footprints in the fresh snow. 1 year later, the Hayes estate no longer looked like a place built to keep secrets. The locked rooms had been opened, the heavy curtains replaced, and the old family crest removed from the gates. In its place hung a simple wooden sign that read Haven House. Children who had been rejected by noble families now filled the halls with laughter, muddy boots, unfinished paintings, and arguments about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Elliot considered the noise an improvement. On the first morning of winter, he stood in his mother's former study reviewing scholarship applications while a 7-year-old boy named Thomas explained why dragons should be included in the history curriculum. "They shaped international trade," Thomas insisted. "That is difficult to prove," Elliot said. "Only because the dragons burned the records." Elliot nodded solemnly. A strong academic argument. From the doorway, Adrian covered a smile with one hand. He wore a dark blue coat instead of ceremonial robes, although the imperial guards outside made anonymity impossible. Thomas bowed with great enthusiasm and immediately asked whether emperors were allowed to own dragons. "Only on weekends," Adrian answered. After the boy hurried away, Adrian crossed the room and placed a warm cup of lemon tea beside Elliot's papers. He still remembered. He always remembered. "The guests are arriving," Adrian said. "Marcus has reorganized the seating chart 4 times. "Why?" 2 dukes refused to sit beside each other because of an argument involving a prize-winning pumpkin. Elliot closed the folder. "Government is inspiring." Outside, snow had begun to fall over the garden. The wedding would take place beneath the glass pavilion Adrian had built according to a sketch found among Elliot's mother's letters. White roses climbed the pillars. Golden lanterns glowed among the bare branches. It was smaller than the court expected and warmer than tradition recommended. Elliot had insisted on both. Their first marriage agreement still rested in the palace archives, signed by 2 cautious strangers who had promised each other distance, privacy, and an ending. Today, they would replace it with a choice. Before the ceremony, Adrian found Elliot alone beside the frozen fountain. "There is something I need to return," he said. He handed Elliot the original contract. The final clause granted Elliot the right to leave after 1 year with his inheritance, title, and complete independence protected by imperial law. The year ended that morning. "You kept your promise," Elliot said. I will always keep that one. Adrian's calm expression could not hide the uncertainty in his eyes. The carriage is prepared if you decide to go. Elliot looked toward the open gates. A year ago, freedom had meant having somewhere to escape. Now it meant knowing he could walk away and choosing not to. He folded the contract and placed it back in Adrian's hand. I asked for the right to leave. Yes. And you gave it to me without making me earn it. Elliot stepped closer and took Adrian's hand. That is why I stayed. They exchanged their vows beneath the lanterns as snow tapped softly against the glass roof. Marcus cried openly and blamed the cold. Thomas scattered flower petals in concentrated handfuls, occasionally throwing them at important guests. When Adrian placed a new gold band beside the silver ring from Elliot's mother, no bells thundered and no ancient magic filled the sky. Elliot preferred it that way. Their first bond had been announced by destiny. This one belonged only to them. After the ceremony, they stood together at the garden gate while the children raced through the snow behind them. Elliot remembered another winter night, another gate, and a young man with one suitcase who believed being abandoned proved he had never been worth keeping. Adrian brushed snow from Elliot's shoulder and asked, "Are you cold?" Elliot smiled. Not anymore. He had once believed he was marrying the richest man in the empire. He eventually learned that Adrian's wealth had nothing to do with gold, palaces, or land. Adrian possessed something far rarer, a love that never demanded proof, never confused control with care, and never asked Elliot to become smaller in order to stay. For the first time in his life, Elliot was not someone's discarded son or valuable heir. He was simply himself, standing beside the man he loved, at the entrance to a home whose gates would always remain open.